Alright, this is study 20 of Galatians. Today we're going to be looking at verse 13 to 15 of chapter 5. And before we do, we'll answer the questions from verse 7 to 12. It's about the Judaisers. So first of all, question 1, the Judaisers were persuading people away from the truth of God. The New Testament uses leaven or yeast as an illustration of false teaching or of unrepentant sin. Matthew 16 verse 6 to 12 and 1 Corinthians 5 verse 6 to 8 will show you that. A small amount of leaven put in dough would spread and fill the whole. And so it was with the false teaching of the Judaisers. To add even a little bit of false teaching, a little bit of legalism, a little bit of works-based justification and sanctification would eventually corrupt the whole message of the gospel. Question 2 then, the Judaisers were hindering the believers from running the race of faith well by breaking up the road with legalism. They were confusing and unsettling the believers, taking away their rest and peace in the gospel. And in question 3, Paul explains that the deeds of the seducing Judaisers were worse than being seduced. So the seducers were worse than the ones being seduced. He writes that they will bear their judgment or their penalty. And this is harkening back to Galatians 1 verse 8 to verse 9. Paul, speaking in hyperbole, says that he wishes they wouldn't just be circumcised, but would go all the way and castrate themselves. Now again, he's exaggerating, but what he's saying is this is so important that what they're teaching as a heresy here. So now we're in verse 13 to verse 15. If we're free, which is what chapter 5 verse 1 says, if we're free and we don't have to live by the law of Moses, then how do we live as Christians? What should we do? What race are we running that Paul talks about here? Well, chapter 5 verse 1 to 12 is saying we are free and we should not live in legalism. But chapter 5 verse 13 onwards is saying that we're free and we shouldn't be living in license. To live in legalism is to bind yourself to the law, to live according to the law. And to live in license is still to be bound to the flesh, to live in sin. And there's a new way to live, and it's the way of liberty. Chapter 5 verse 14 is a quote from Leviticus 19 verse 18. So 2 questions for today. What should we not do with our freedom? Chapter 5 verse 13 and 15. And question 2, what should we do with our freedom? Chapter 5 verse 13 to 14. And go and read chapter 6 verse 2. Read Romans chapter 13 verse 8 to 10. And James chapter 2 verse 8 to 12. God bless.